Good morning. I'm Leah Dail, and I'm a Master Gardener here in Wake County, and with me is Kattman, also a Master Gardener. Thank you all for swimming over today to be at the lecture. I wasn't sure if anybody would show up, but then we can't be in the yard today, so this is the next best place, I suppose. And we're going to talk today about attracting pollinators to your garden. So the pollinators that we're going to talk about today are bees. Oh, I told Mark I would hit that, and I did it in the first minute.
I think you have the new record for doing this quickly.
I set a record for signing up for an Arboretum class last week. I signed up like 40 minutes before the class started, so I'm all about setting records here. The pollinators that we want to talk about today are bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds, and they are essential to us because it's estimated that 1/3 of our diets are derived from insect-pollinated plants, and without the pollinators, the grocery stores and farmers markets would not be quite as stocked as they are. And pollinators also help increase yields and improve crop production and quality. So here's some pollinators here. So one of the problems is that there's a threat to pollinators. They occur naturally, but because of our development and clearing forests, their habitats are lost. They often need low-lying areas to nest and for protection, and when we're clearing all those areas, then they've lost those. And also pollution is a big issue. The chemicals that we put on our roads and also on our lawns wash into the waterways and wetlands, and that is not good for the pollinators. I've heard people talk to me before as a master gardener thinking that we don't promote use of any kind of chemicals in the yard, that we're all about organic gardening. And what I want to say to that is that we're not anti-chemicals or any kind of pesticides and herbicides, but what we want you to do is to use them for the right problem that you're trying to treat, using the right chemical, the right product, and apply it according to directions and at the right time of year. So this is really, really important. Even organics can be harmful and toxic. So again, choosing the right one for the pest or the disease that you're trying to treat, not applying it when the plants are in bloom, because the pollinators are going to be coming to those plants, and they will, even if you haven't sprayed them directly, they will come into contact with that product, and it can be harmful to them and kill them. And other things that we can do to protect pollinators, we've got a bird, is increase the use of native plants, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Increase flowering plants in your yard. Again, creating those nesting sites for bees. We often think of bees in hives and colonies, but oftentimes bees, most of them are solitary, and they actually live in low-lying areas, and so they need natural areas to nest and live. And then again, using the pesticides sparingly, according to the directions, only if you need them, and if you want to use them at all. So the pollinators need 3 basic things. We need these things as well. They need cover and shelter. We often think of these pollinators as flying, but they do need some rest time, so they need places to perch and to rest, as well as to live. They need water, and they need food sources. And oftentimes we only think of the food sources, planting the plants for the pollinators, but they're going to need a little bit more than that. We don't have internet connection.
I can get one going for you.
Well, it's picture flowers and there's butterflies. Everybody close your eyes and imagine butterflies. So your habitat for pollinators should provide plants that have both pollen and nectar for them. And we encourage you to plant native plants. A lot of the exotics are not the food sources that our native pollinators want. They also can be very invasive, and you might have experience with that now. Things that you planted that look pretty, they tend to take over areas, and even though the blooms are pretty, they don't provide the food source that the pollinators need. And again, the habitat should have a place for your pollinators to rest. And it's all these 3 things together that provide the elements for pollinators to live and thrive And one of the things about pollinators is they're beautiful in your garden. So it's a win-win for everybody, providing food sources, but you're also having a beautiful yard, landscape. As a master gardener, I'm obligated in every single talk that I give to say, encourage you to do a soil test. And we do have soil test kits. That's the way you're going to be the most successful in your gardening efforts, is to have the right soil to begin with. We're very fortunate here in North Carolina that we do free soil testing for homeowners for most of the year, from March through November. You can get the soil test done for free during the winter months. The lab is the first priority is the commercial farmers. So there's a slight fee for the soil test. But right now you can have them done for free, and that way you know what you've got to begin with. We encourage you to do soil tests about every 2 to 3 years, testing different areas of your landscape so that you can have the right ingredients for the right plants. And we've got tests and the pamphlets that tell you how to do the soil test. And I guess it's a good time to make a plug for Master Gardeners. If you have questions, we have an advice line Monday through Friday. It's pretty much all day except for lunch. And we'd love to help you be more successful, so give us a call. And one of our favorite answers is, well, a lot of people do know answers, but I say oftentimes, I don't know, but I'll be happy to find that out for you. And we can research that question and give you information on how to solve any kind of problems, or runs the gamut. It doesn't have to be problems, but if you're looking for advice on plants or that kind of information as well.
Are you going to give us a telephone number?
Yes.
Or is it coming in?
Okay, there's a card at the back that has a schedule of the rest of the lectures that we're doing here at the Arboretum, and it's got our contact information. You can also email us, and we can try and answer questions that way as well. But phone, email, you can find us at a lot of gardening events. We're at the Farmers Market every weekend in Raleigh and Wake Forest, a lot of different places. But yeah, please contact us. And in addition to, the cards are in the back, but we also have different handouts with some of the information about pollinators here at the front that you're welcome to take some of those resources as well. And the soil test kits are up there. So anytime that you're gardening, a lot of times you're more successful if you sketch out and plan out what it is that you're going to plant. So with the pollinators, the same thing, planning your flower arrangement, making sure you have those water sources and basking or resting areas and feeders if you need them. To make it more pleasant and easier for the pollinators to get in and out, we suggest that you plant your tallest trees or shrubs at the back borders, and then working with layers. Hummingbirds need plants that are at least 2 feet high to feed from, so they would be, more of your mid layer, and then the shorter things in the front. And then right now, planting is a great time right now. I will brag on myself. I've been to a couple plant sales, and I got everything planted Saturday night because I knew this rain was coming. Every raindrop I see, I think, oh, my plants are so happy. And if you know me, that's very unusual for me to actually get it in. Oh, there are the butterflies. Look at them. So. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about butterflies, and they're some of the happiest things in the garden, I think. They're very easy to attract, and there's not a lot of maintenance involved, and you just need to make sure you've got the food source and some water and the resting place, like we said earlier. We want to attract natives to our region, and that means planting native plants, and we're going to talk about some of those later. Like I said earlier, exotics tend to grow with a lot of vigor, and they can take over, and they're not the best food sources for pollinators, so we don't recommend them. They don't produce as much nectar, so even though they are pretty, they're not the right food source all the time. So you want a diversity of host plants, and a host plant is a plant that the butterfly can lay its eggs, and or the caterpillar is there. They lay the eggs, the caterpillar comes out, the caterpillar eats that host plant. It's an amazing thing that butterflies know to do that. They pick the food source that caterpillar is going to need. And they tend to be very picky eaters, so not just anything is going to do. If you're going to want to attract certain kinds of butterflies, then you need to plant particular plants. It's helpful that diversity of plants is also going to provide a variety of nectar plants throughout the season, and you're also doing it, staggering it so that you have things blooming during the entire season to satisfy all the pollinators. It's a good idea to have different blooms with different sizes and depths, because different pollinators have different needs. Their mouths are shaped differently, so they need different kinds of blooms. And when you're planting your plants, you want to group things together so that they have the same light sources and water requirements. I learned this when we were putting this together a couple of years ago. Butterflies can't drink from open water sources, so having an area like this where there's sand that you keep wet is a good idea, and they can drink from that. It can be as small as a cup of sand that's moist, but those rocks also provide a perch site for them, because I would assume that all that flapping takes a lot of energy, and they've got to rest every once in a while.
So explain that, not from open water, you mean there's actually no water on top of that sand? It's not like a little lake with sand on the bottom?
No, it's not as much as standing water, no, just wet enough so that it's, and somehow or another they're able to get that moisture out. So, I'm going to hand it over to Karen to do hummingbirds, and we're going to do
Good morning. Thank you for your patience while we make that quick switch. So I am Karen Kattman. I'm also a master gardener, and I'm going to pick up in respect of our time right away with hummingbirds. So hummingbirds pollinate more than 160 of our native North American plants, and they're pretty easily attracted to your backyard. To attract them, you want to plant a variety of flowers, and you certainly can use feeders. And we'll talk a little bit about those feeders and some of the plants and some of their habitat. But when you do feeders, you want to do 4 parts water, you want to boil the water, and 1 part sugar. Now I'm going to have to. All right. So there's just a couple pictures of the ruby-throated hummingbirds. We most often see the ruby-throated hummingbird here, and they do fly south for vacation in the winter. They can travel nonstop for up to 20 hours. So usually late in October, they're getting ready to make their trip. To identify them, the male is the one that is got the ruby throat, and the female usually has an emerald colored back. I already mentioned that they're the most common in our suburban gardens, and they're the only species of hummingbird that breeds. It says they're in North Carolina, but I believe that it's they breed east of the Mississippi River. So I wasn't able to get concise information on that, so that's a little unclear to me. Is the ruby-throated one? Okay. So they build nests. They like to be in the canopy up about 10 to 30 feet off the ground. So again, that's why your layering of your yard is really important, because you want the lower for the fruits and bees and butterflies, but those hummingbirds stay at a height. That's where they build their webs, nests. They feed. So I want to go back to the other one a minute here and talk about those nests high in the trees. You will not see them because they're so high, they're covered by the foliage of the trees. But the nests are very small. They're about the size of a tennis ball. And as many of you know, that the male hummingbirds will come back earlier. They're scouting for the area to call their territory. Females will follow 7 to 10 to maybe 14 days later. Gives those males a chance to mark their territory. And in some of my research, I actually read the word harem, because the male female hummingbirds have a harem. So I have some information that's really interesting, and I want to share that with you here too. Only the female feeds the baby hummingbirds, but they'll make this nest about the size of a tennis ball, and then they'll have most likely 2 eggs they will lay. 3 is usually too many for the female to take care of, and 1 is not maximizing on her reproductive capability. So it's usually 2. Also, she's the only one that feeds them. But the female needs to stay on those eggs 50 to 55 minutes out of an hour. So that doesn't give her much time to go search for food. So that's why it's really important for us to have plants nearby. Now, in reading about this female, male, and harem kind of thing, the males do not feed them, only the females. And if a female from another territory comes into a male territory that he has set up, he will oftentimes chase that female out of his area. But if it's one of his female birds, he will allow them to feed there. So I found that was really kind of interesting because, again, she has that short time that she's allowed off the nest. The incubation period is about 14 to 21 days, and they fledge after about 5 to 6 weeks. They feed also on small insects and the nectar. Again, to attract them to your yard, you want to include a variety of flowering plants that provide the nectar throughout the warmer weather. Hummingbirds prefer the nectar from the bright tubular flowers such as the crossvine, the Carolina jasmine, and the red buckeye. You know, like those trumpet plants. And again, here's some more pictures of the feeders.
They have to be red?
The ruby throat, oh, you mean the planters? That's a good question, because I want you to know I was in Home Depot the other day, and there was a couple buying one of these with the yellow on them. And they're not advised because that yellow, bees love to get to that yellow. Yes. And there's sugar in there. So it's advised not to buy one with yellow. And I said to my husband, should I tell them they're not buying the right kind of hummingbird?
Yeah, we gotta feed the bees too, don't we?
Right. But we're gonna talk about those in a minute. And he was like, well, Karen, you know, I think he was trying to hurry me out of the store before I was trying to tell them that, and that the salesman would be like, lady, I'm making a sale, be quiet. But your hummingbird feeders can be left up year-round because in addition to the ruby-throated hummingbird, we have what we call a rufous hummingbird that is being seen more and more in this area. It's mostly in the mountains, I think. And it's not clear about why they stay in the winter here, because they're also a migratory bird, but they're thinking that some of the baby birds, the newer birds, are not getting that instinct to fly away, or they're not sure how to do that. So that's really not clear. But you can leave the feeders up all year. You have to make sure that they do not freeze, the water in them. You want to have, again, the water, 4 parts water, 1 part sugar. I don't know if maybe they actually call those yellow parts like bee and wasp guards, so they can't get in there, but the hummingbird can with his beak. But you can also use like Vaseline on those areas to keep the bees off of there. They'll fly. I have a hummingbird feeder that has a moat, and I've seen finches in the winter, or I mean in the summer, going for the water in the moat. And I'm always like, you know what? I don't have enough water in my yard for the birds to drink when I see them doing that. I'm always checking the places where I have water then. So, and it does say, like, see that stick holding the hummingbird on the picture on the left?
Yep.
That the bees will often get on there, and you can put Vaseline on that too, and they'll slide. They won't be able to get down to the hummingbird feeder as easily. Pardon me? Ants, the same way, yes. And then it's advised that you clean your feeder at least once a week. But I can tell you that in the summer months when there's mold and it's humid, I'm cleaning mine more often than just once a week. I'm usually cleaning it about every 3 to 4 days. It's advised not to use soap. You can use a bleach solution, but if you use a bleach solution, maybe you want to clean it like every 3 days for a couple weeks and then use bleach. But if you use bleach, you want it to air dry so it's completely dry before you put the water back in there, so it's not harmful to the hummingbird. You want to place the feeders where the hummingbird already feeds. You want to make sure that the effect of the wind is minimized. You know, remember, hummingbirds are attracted to sunny areas. I already mentioned that you can leave the hummingbird feeders up all year long. You just want to watch that time when it gets really, really cold, which we really haven't experienced much here in the last couple winters. So it is advised to avoid feeders with yellow just because that also is what attracts the bees. And again, it just gives you the changing the water 3 to 5 days and cleaning it. So the next slide here is just pictures of plants that hummingbirds are attracted to. In the upper left, we have a lantana, Miss Huff. The lower left is goldenrod. And then the top right, I'm not really sure what that is, if somebody knows. It looks like a Carolina jasmine, only it's pink. My Carolina jasmine is yellow. So there's been some discussion about that. But the lower right is then bee balm.
Is that the crossvine in the inventory maybe?
Well, that's what I think it is. Is that usually pink?
It can
Well,
come.
kind of an orangey, tangerine color, not pink, but there's other
And there,
things in the
you know,
family.
I've seen some that are white. Are those,
Crossvine.
does Carolina jasmine ever come in white?
There's a pale yellow, but there's no white.
Okay,
It's very pale.
very pale, so it was probably a very pale yellow and it looked white to me. All right, so we're gonna go on to bees. Bees, bees, bees. Well, a lot of people don't know, but most of the bees are solitary. In fact, about 70%. And bumblebees live in small colonies. Most nest in the ground, and some nest in wood or hollow stumps. In fact, here at the Arboretum, they have boxes, and they put the stems, the hollow stems of the bamboo, will go act as their home. And you can hang them too. You can bundle them and tie them together and hang them in your yard to give them a place to nest if you so desire. But having an area in your yard that has vegetation that you're not turning into a flower garden is also a great place. We have a lot of types of bees in North Carolina. We have honeybees. They are not native, but they are active all year. And the honeybees save their honey over the winter. So we have about 400 to 500 varieties in North Carolina alone. There are 4,000 species of native bees in the U.S., and I use that term native very loosely because the honeybees were brought to the U.S. with early Europeans as early as the late 1500s. But I guess I use native because I think of myself as a native to North Carolina now. But I can tell you I've only lived here about 40 years. So it makes me feel like a native compared to somebody who's been here 2 years. So I use that term loosely. But, worldwide there's over 20,000 types of bees. So we have 50 to 60 species of bumblebees. In the triangle alone, we have over 100. And on any given day, if you're having a good day with bees in your yard, you could find as many as 70 different species. Some of the native bees in North Carolina are leafcutter, sweat bee, mason, carpenter, the squash bee, a mining bee, and a bumblebee. And I think one of the things that's important about bees is that our honeybees, account for managed hives account for 80% of the bees, and 20 are still just our native, making their own way in the world. So again, most fruits and vegetables require pollination, and bees are the most efficient pollinators. So they're very valuable as crop and flower pollinators. So bees visit the flowers to get pollen, which they turn into protein, and they fashion it into what they call bee bread. That's fed to the immature bees. And of course, their nectar is turned into carbohydrates, consumed for the energy, and then with the honeybee, it's turned into the honey, which is what they're trying to gather, and their byproduct. So pollination is a byproduct of that activity, and we benefit from that. I want to talk a little bit about the cause for concern on the decline of the bees. We've talked about being valuable crop pollinators and plant pollinators. Over the last 60 years, and this is what really kind of gets me about the bees, the number of managed honeybee colonies in the U.S. has declined by 50%. It may be 45 to 50%. I'm not really sure, but what I read was 50%. But at the same time, our croplands requiring bee pollination has increased by 300%. So we have more people, and we're having to grow more food, more plants, more crops to feed those people by 300%. That's way an imbalance that we really need to be concerned about. So why do we need to be concerned, or what is causing that bee decline? It is very complex and interacting. There's parasites, diseases, pesticides, environmental stress, poor nutrition, habitat loss. So as far as parasites, there's a mite that is really the biggest concern. There's actually two of them, and I hope I pronounce this one correctly. It's called the Varroa mite, as well as a tracheal mite. The Varroa mite is the one that has done the most damage. it's the most serious pest of the honeybee colonies, and it's not just here in North Carolina or in the U.S., but it is worldwide concern. It was first detected in North Carolina in 1990. It had been introduced to the U.S. just 3 years prior to that. And virtually, some of the facts that I read, that all the wild honeybee colonies have all been wiped out by these mites. So beekeepers struggle to manage and keep their beehives clean, to keep that, especially the varroa mite, out of the managed beehives. They monitor those hives very closely. Of course, the other things, they get diseases. Pesticides, we've already talked in general about pesticides for pollinators. Environmental stresses, that's where we're cutting down trees, building houses, and we don't have to go very far to see that here in North Carolina, but it's happening across the country. Environmental stresses. You have and poor nutrition. So we want to make sure that we have good flowers for them to visit, and the habitat loss. And the part about that, not just for bees, but for butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds, is that when you think about finding them shelter and cover for their habitat, you want to think about they want a safe place so they can do reproduction too. So that's what's keeping their children going. So they have to feel safe in those places. Okay. So I beat myself to this slide here. We want to minimize pesticide use. As Leah said, we as master gardeners don't say no chemical use, but we really promote integrated pest management. And so in a nutshell, what that is taking care of your flowers in your gardens, noticing early if you're having a problem in your garden with a pest, and then choosing the correct pesticide for that plant or pest. And because the whole idea is you want to minimize the use of the chemicals. So that's about the pesticides again. Again, I talked a little bit about the nesting habits for bees earlier. We want to think about how we can do that, and then plant flowers for them to visit. Planting for bees, you want to have, flowers, sun, at least 6 hours a day. A lot of people say, well, I want to plant this over by my tree here. It gets 3 hours, plant's probably going to die because it's not going to have enough sun. You need to know what plant requires what to live. So, but for bees, you want to plant them in masses because you don't want them spending a lot of energy having to go from one side of your yard way to the other side because you've got that plant there and that plant there. Plant them in a clump, have a variety, which is like a diversity. Perennials are best, natives are best because we don't have to work as hard to take care of them, but the bees have coexisted with them, so they're used to those plants. They like those plants. And again, we talked about rocks for basking sites, and stagger your planting dates. So, it's good to pay attention to your yard and take notes. What's blooming, early April, May, what's blooming June, July. And if you have a time period during the summer, early spring to late fall, where you don't have blooms, go find what, or call us, use those advice cards and say, okay, Master Gardener, I need to fill in this dearth time in my garden. What kind of plants should I be planting that are going to bloom now? This is just a little slide here talking about native plants. Native plants are generally those defined which occurred in North America prior to European settlement. Non-native are those not natural to our area. And the reason that that's important is because those non-native plants will grow very big and can displace plants that are native. And then the bees, the butterflies, the hummingbirds can't get to the native plants. So that's why it's so important. And we want to make sure that we give them that pattern to fly and stay in the yard. So it's just worth mentioning. I'm going to turn this back over to Leah because we actually have some photographs of some plants that she's going to share with us. And I will mention that we have, I brought lots of publications, different ones. There's some how to make your yard, attract wildlife to your yard. We have a top 25 pollinator native plants list. So thank you very much. And I just want to say again that I said that we have those as flyouts. The cards are on the table. If you call us, we'll tell you how to find that online or email a list to you.
Ask a question about,
Uh-huh.
you didn't mention anything about the carpenter bees, you know, that are always digging in.
Yes,
into
I do.
raw wood. You also mentioned something about tubes in the garden for bees. Would they be maybe something carpenter bees would like to do instead of going into your deck?
That's a great question.
That's a good idea.
And I have asked my husband that too. I said, those bees are boring into our house. I said, you know, what are we going to do? I've heard lots of different things, and I cannot say that I've researched how to get rid of those. I need to tell you research-based information. I might not have cured my own problem with research-based technique, but if you have a problem and you want to talk to me after, I will help you find an answer. And just hanging up blocks of wood, I don't think that does it. I don't think it does it.
I did see at the checkout counter at Lowe's, they had a hunting carpenter bee traps for $20.
Yeah, so this is my recommendation on that. They may work, but I would suggest we take a look at how to get rid of those. Really kind of research that before I invested $20 in, you
Well,
know.
they pollinate too, so.
They do, but you don't want them weakening the structure of your home. I can remember when I first moved to North Carolina, I'm going to tell the story on myself, and then I'll stop. But I had one of those bees. I moved here a long time ago. I was younger then. Not as wise as I am. Not that I'm wise now, but one day I was out there and I watched this bee. It was drilling up into the siding, and that bee went up there, and I just happened to have a cork, and I shoved that cork up there, and that bee never came out of that hole, and I didn't have any more problems the rest of that summer. Now, that was not a nice way to handle the problem.
I
But
tried that one time, but the bee just went through the other side.
did he really?
That was my humming, that was my bee, anyways.
So I do think we have been very fortunate. We have not had a problem with the carpenter bees in the last couple of years. So we can look at that and talk about that further.
Okay. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of native pollinator plants that you might want to try in your yard if you haven't already. And as Karen mentioned, we've got a list of top 25 native pollinators for North Carolina. This is a list put together by Debbie Roos, who is an extension agent in Chatham County, and she's all about the pollinators. If you want a fun field trip, go to her pollinator paradise in Chatham County near Pittsburgh and see what's growing. You can also go to her website, and she keeps her slides updated of what's blooming in her garden now. So it's a great resource. So this is the purple coneflower, and it is a very hardy plant. It can tolerate dry, droughty soil, hot summer sun, and just keeps blooming. It provides nectar for bees and butterflies when it's blooming, and it's a great seed source for birds when it's drying up. So that's something that I leave in my garden because the finches love the coneflower seeds. It's kind of funny, the research information that we have here says that this plant is resistant to damage by deer, which makes me laugh because the deer don't read these, and I have not had them bother them in my yard, but that doesn't mean that they won't. If they get hungry enough, they will eat anything. This is goldenrod, and this gets a bum rap because people oftentimes confuse it with ragweed, which is a pollen source that a lot of people are allergic to. But goldenrod is not your source of seasonal allergies, so don't blame the goldenrod. It's really popular as a perennial in Europe, and it's becoming more and more popular here. And it's a beautiful plant, planted in, like we said, in masses. And you've got that yellow, goes really well with blue asters and hardy azuratum. And it provides nectar for bees, and this is another one they say is resistant to deer damage. How tall? 2 feet or so. Is that right?
There's some that get taller, but some
Generally,
that'll get 4 feet,
yeah,
but most
2 to
about
4 feet. Yeah.
What, excuse me, what did you say it goes well with? You said blue asters and what else?
Azuratum.
hardy azuratum.
Yeah.
It blooms in the fall.
This here is a buttonbush, and I don't have this in my yard. I'm not that familiar with it, but it has yellow fall foliage, and this is needs to be pruned every year for flower production. So you prune it down, and one thing to know though, the foliage is poisonous to livestock, but the flowers attract butterflies and bees.
It generally goes in rain gardens.
In rain gardens, okay? Good
It
to
needs
know.
more water than what
Okay.
you normally get.
And this is butterfly weed, and guess what it attracts? Butterflies. It's also known as milkweed. It serves as an adult nectar source, and it's also really important because it's a larval food source for monarch butterflies. And the seeds of cultivars such as gay butterflies may contain yellow and bright red individuals, but the typical color range is orange. And the stem does not have a milky sap of the butterfly weed. The milkweed does. Again, it's supposed to be resistant to deer damage. And that's 1 to 3 feet. Colors are orange, red, and yellow. This is Foxglove, beardtongue, and this is a spring blooming plant. So again, we talked about staggering your bloom times in your garden, so this would be one of the earlier ones. It's 2 to 4 feet, has smooth stems and opposite lance-shaped to oblong, finely toothed leaves. You can't see those in the picture here. And this has the trumpet-shaped flower. So that's a good one for hummingbirds. This is wild indigo, and it is a native plant to the eastern part of North America, from Canada all the way down to Georgia. And the blue flowers used to be used in dye, might still be used, but something that we found out that we could use as a dye. And it provides nectar for butterflies, and again is a host to caterpillars, the dusky winged caterpillars, and also several others. Joe-pye weed, and there you go, butterfly on Joe-pye weed. These occur natively. You oftentimes find them in thickets and woodlands in the eastern half of the U.S. And they get between 3 and 12 feet, so a much taller plant than some of the others. And they can provide a focal interest point in your garden. And the flowers have a slight vanilla fragrance that becomes a little bit more intense when you crush it. And they are a late summer, early fall bloomer. Stokes aster. This is a native perennial, also a wildflower. You can find it from here down to Florida, and the leaves will stay on it throughout the winter. And there are a lot of different cultivars available, and it's kind of an old-timey plant, but you can find it around here. Again, it's supposed to be resistant to deer damage. But when you find that plant, let me know, because I need a lot of it in my yard. We have a number of resources noted here. I'll leave this up so that if you want to note any of these websites, or if you want us to send this to you, we can email it to you as well. Sometimes it's easier to be able to click on the link. The last slide is information about how to contact us, but again, we have the cards. We encourage you to call us and give us something to do. Help us help you be more successful. So are there any questions or things that we can
Do we just give you our email list, our email address for this?
Sure, I can send that to you.
I would just like to point out that the native versus non-native, there are a lot of non-native plants that are not aggressive, and there are a lot of natives that are aggressive. So I think there's a place for both in every garden. You know, in my yard, you're looking for Stokes aster, it's become invasive because it receives everywhere.
Right.
Same with the hardy ageratum. So I just think there's a place for both of them.
Yeah, and there's a continuing debate about what is actually native. Where do you start? Like Karen was saying, she feels like a native after 40 years, but a lot of things that we consider natives were brought here by the European settlers. They've been here for hundreds of years, so we assume that they're a native or call them a native. So there's intense debate amongst flower people.
And then there's the question, is a hybrid the native or not? Most people think it is, and other people think it's not. You've got to have
Right.
the species.
And that's a great point, that you do have some unruly natives that don't have a place in your particular landscape, because they are very, very aggressive growers. Yeah.
For pollination, a single flower is far, far superior to a double flower.
Okay. That's good to know.
For trumpet vine and crossvine, is there any way to grow that so it won't just take over the world?
Yeah, good luck.
So it won't what? Take over the
Take
world?
over the world.
I don't know about those in particular, but I do grow the Carolina jasmine in my yard. And I do have to cut it. It wants to spring out into other things. But I have not found it difficult to keep it contained. I have like an old-timey garden gate that is staked, and that's what stakes up the Carolina jasmine. And when it blooms, it's gorgeous. And I have to do it maybe 3 times during the season.
Yeah, but Carolina jasmine is hard, but trumpet vine grows up power poles.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's supposed to be the best thing for hummingbirds, but I'm really afraid to put it out.
And once you've got it, it's really hard
Yeah.
to
To
get
if you
rid of
decide
it.
you don't want it, it says, nope, I'm here to stay.
Yeah, I have one in my yard. The birds brought it in, and I literally could not control it with a sharp spade and had to go to Ziploc bags as the little guys were coming up and spraying in the Ziploc bag with Roundup and putting it over the top and saying, this is it.
And did that work?
It worked.
Okay. Because
But-
I've got it coming up in my
Diligently, I
vegetable
bet you
garden.
had to
Oh,
do it,
yeah,
huh?
I just had to find it. It was a volunteer.
An easier technique that I learned at one of our master gardener meetings was called dip and clip. You have a set of pruners that you use just for dipping in straight Roundup. Clip it, and it doesn't come back. It works.
Yeah. There's a question.
Straight
I wondered,
straight Roundup.
are there any plants that would be particularly recommended that would do well in planters in container gardens? A lot of these, I've worked with them in the yard, and we're in a different place now. So I'm looking for things that can handle heat in a small pot, or a large container. You can, but some of them are so tall that they don't, like, they don't work on a deck or.
A lot of
You
the
know.
agastache will attract pollinators and they don't need as much water. They can take the heat. And a lot of the salvias are some that don't get real big. There are some
Right.
that stay small.
Thank you, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
I got a mason bee nest box, with holes drilled in it at the E.W. Wells Heritage Day. And there were no instructions that came with it as to where to put it. Does it need to face south, north, how high, how low, where? Any clues?
Chris, that's what those boxes are. Aren't they for mason bees out in the?
Well, they're for any of the wood bees.
Okay. Do you know?
I've not heard of anywhere facing myself.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's a question that we could research for you, but I don't know.
I'd like to share one other way to get rid of invasives, and that is to clip and have those old time daubers for looking envelopes.
Yeah.
Have your chemical in that, and then just dab the top of the stem that you just got.
I've done it with a paintbrush as well.
I use a
Yeah.
paintbrush too.
Yeah.
I use a paintbrush.
This is just real specific. It's just there. I'm not messing with it.
The other thing I've done is I take a gallon milk jug, cut the bottom off, and I stick my sprayer down into the milk jug, and I put the milk jug right over the plant, or if it's a smaller plant, you can use a smaller plastic jug, but that controls it so it doesn't
Don't
drip,
get that
it doesn't
drift.
get anything else.
That's a
Nice.
great idea.
Um,
That's why we come to these things, to learn all these awesome tips.
So your concern is not the Roundup getting to the ground, but just not killing
Not getting anything around it.
surrounding plants.
Right. Once the Roundup dries, it's fairly stable, it doesn't move around a lot.
I heard that for years, and now recently I've been hearing, well, maybe Roundup isn't so innocuous as we've been taught.
Well, some people will say use vinegar. Vinegar's not
This doesn't do the
without
job.
problems either.
Yeah.
And then like my neighbor used motor oil. What is that? Instead of Roundup? I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'd rather
right.
do Roundup.
It was just, I just wondered if you had an answer to this newer information.
I don't know. When I first moved here, Extension Service and the EPA, because I live on a small lake and I needed something to help control some really awful, nasty, aggressive weeds along the lake. And EPA and Extension Service told me Roundup was better than anything else. Just do it before it rained. I mean, don't do it right before rain, let it dry. But I'll do other things. I will pull if possible. I'll do flame torching if possible. I'll do anything else if possible. That's the last resort.
Yeah. I just have another question. Does safer soap or some of those other types of controls bother our beneficials? They do? It's
Well,
popcorn?
it's in everything.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Jump right in.
Insecticide, those insects.
I thought safer soap was
It's more of an organic,
is it? But it's still dangerous.
But it still kills bugs.
Yeah, it's a-
Okay, thanks.
And that's the thing with herbicides, pesticides, organic or not, they don't discriminate. And if it kills an insect, it kills any insect pretty much. So that's why we want to be really careful and judicious in using them. And before I forget, Karen just told me that the Joe-pye weed is the North Carolina native wildflower of the year. So she said that if you send a self-addressed stamped envelope, remember stamps? We used to have stamps, that they will send you Joe-pye weed seed.
Who will?
So, the Botanical Gardens. So-
It's not a huge packet, but you'll get a brochure with some seeds.
Cool.
There's little Joe-pye weed that's a little more manageable. And it
Okay.
does the same thing, it's just in a smaller package.
Smaller is sometimes better. Well, again, thank you all for coming out on